together, that doesn't make sense to me. So for me, I gotta go with a mind map. But it's gonna be different for all of you. You're doing a T-chart, what are you thinking? Outline with numbers? Here, does that help you? All right, Najai, what do you got? You're doing T-chart, I see a wonder, I checked on you too. All right, so everybody's got their styles all titled. Girls, you have a big case of sillies, let's pull it together. You changed it to what? You're doing both as well? Okay, that's fine. Make sure you title it. All right, now, there are 6 slides. 5 of them you're going to want to get information from. You're going to need at least 7 concrete details in your letter. So keep that in mind. You want to have options of things to write about. Okay? Everybody with me so far? And the last thing before we start, when I say 3, 2, 1, silence, conversations have to be done. You get 2 warnings. That 3rd warning, VR is done. The next VR session is canceled. Okay? You guys know this. You have to be able to read the narrative after the image. But you can talk all you want when we first open up each slide. Okay? So you get your chance to talk. We just have to be able to switch back and forth. Okay. They're being passed out. As soon as you get it, go ahead, take a look. If you want to move around the room, you can do that. Okay, make yourself comfortable. Are these all set? Is this one good? Ew.
Mine is blind.
Oh my God, I see someone's pose. This is World War II. You're someone's pose. There's people smiling. They're having a conversation.
They're smoking.
Sandy, if you would like to join us, I need you to get your paper and get the do now done. Okay, you ready? Okay. I'm going to need silence in 3, 2, and 1. Here we go. Much of the fighting in the First World War was carried out via trench warfare. Soldiers on each side lived in opposing trenches, dug a few hundred meters away from each other. The space between was called no man's land. Trench life was dangerous and dirty, but also downright dull. Men were killed in the millions, and those that lived had to cope with appalling conditions. Let's explore what life was like in the trench. Keeping watch. The enemy could attack at any time, so soldiers worked in shifts to keep lookout. This could be tiring work, but sleeping on the job was considered a serious offense, punishable by death or imprisonment. Why would it be so serious if you fell asleep on watch? Juliana?
Because you can get your other fellow soldiers killed.
Yeah, if you don't warn people, right, that they're coming over the top, hundreds of people are going to die. Edward? You're going to reiterate that? Okay. Everyday tasks. As well as being ready to kill or be killed, soldiers' duties included cleaning weapons, ready for inspection, and carrying out trench maintenance, such as repairing barbed wire and trench walls. Oh, Mr. Sheridan, it's go time on the trench foot.
Oh, I will get trench foot up and running.
Okay. This is disturbing, but I think it's really, unfortunately, interesting.
Cut your
Trench
toes.
foot. Okay.
There's a
Many
guy
soldiers
on Michaela's
suffered from
toes.
trench foot, an infection caused by prolonged standing in damp, muddy conditions. Their feet would become numb and turn blue. Soldiers with serious cases would have to have their feet, anyone?
Cut off.
Amputated. Very good.
Their toes nibbled off.
you have probably had, if you've ever gone like running or played, like been outside for a long time, like a hot, hot day, and your feet get sweaty, sometimes you take your socks off and your feet are a little bit wrinkled. Well, it's like that times like 1,000, because originally your feet are going to start off looking like that, all wrinkly, but then eventually what happens is, and that's probably going to be a picture from, that's probably a picture from World War I. You can see he's not going to be doing a good job of counting to 10. He doesn't see toes there. You can see the rest of the ones are black. It's kind of like what happens with like frostbite, where if you lose circulation and then all of a sudden you have to basically cut the toe off, it's dead anyway. So that's trench coat.
You were affected by that, right? That bothers you? Write about it. Get it on your chart. Okay? If you just reacted to something, right? Get it on your chart so you can put it in your life.
Oh, that's great.
Yes.
How much do we have to write?
Pardon?
How much do we have to write?
Kayla wants to know how much to write. How many details do you need for your letter? No, there's no. I'm not interested in the number of I hear I want to know.
7.
You need 7 concrete details for that letter. So you want to make sure that you're writing enough where you can kind of pick and choose the best details for your letter. Okay? The letter's going to count quite a bit.
Now the shark's nibble on his toes.
You're using this information to write a letter home to trenches, describing life in trench warfare.
I think I'm
So you need enough
worried about
notes
how
where
my
you
toes
can
are starting
choose
to
the best
fall.
details.
I have trench foot. I might not be able to walk.
You have to eat your own feet.
A lot of people did amputate their own feet. I mean, it's not like there's too many doctors running around. You're out in the trenches for months at a time, standing in a puddle of water. But you know what the problem is that your foot starts to really smell.
What's that?
It's like dead
Oh,
rotting.
what's that smell? Is that your feet, man? Ew.
It's like dead rotting. Just think about how well feet smell when they're alive.
No, feet smell. You're disgusting.
Okay, the next slide is open. Feel free to move around.
What is water bottles? Who's gonna die? Look at that helmet. Look at that girl.
Oh, no, he's not.
Oh, somebody got murdered.
Juliana is
Oh, somebody got 360 no scope.
This isn't Call of Duty, guys.
Yo, that's victorious, bro. Yeah, the other guy.
They would, yeah. But medics,
that guy's a professional.
Okay, I need silence in 3, 2, and 1. Thank you, Jaden. I appreciate you finishing that conversation. Okay, we've been looking at industrialization and how it changed everything. Raising our hands, how does industrialization change war? Go ahead, Nathan. Yeah, absolutely. What else? Yeah, all of this creativity is using to create weapons that can kill better, right? So now we're going to take a look at the medics trying to solve some of these problems created by industrialization and war. Treating the injured. A soldier shot down in no man's land is attended by a Royal Army Medical Corps stretcher bearer. Though the wounded man has fallen into a shell hole, which is a crater produced by artillery, that's like cannons, which offers some protection, the medic is risking his own life by treating him. After initial treatment, soldiers could be sent to the Royal Army Medical Corps, the RAMC, and the temporary hospitals. Some soldiers gave themselves injuries, known as lightly injuries, in hopes of being sent home. So what can we infer about a lightly injury? What would that be like if you were hoping to get sent home?
Free ride home, so you don't have to die.
You're right, free ride home, but Jaden, how bad would the injury be?
Bad.
If it's terrible, you might not recover,
Cut your hand off.
Good.
right? Something that you can live with, right?
Get shot.
But enough, there you go. Okay, back to silence so I can read the next three. Nice job. Shot down. The first priority would be to get the soldier to the safety of the trench, which was not easy. Stretcher bearer was dangerous and awkward. Wounds had to be cleaned carefully, and dirty conditions meant that infection was likely. Medics, take a quick peek because there's a whole other image now that just popped up. Take a peek. Medics were given a standard medical kit, but during the war, new kinds of weapons such as poison gas and flamethrowers were developed, which made treatment more difficult. Soldiers were also affected by psychological trauma, known as shell shock. Medics faced life or death decisions. Great question. And that was a really good question. Medics face life or death decisions. For example, could the wounded soldier be healed? Was it worth the risk of rescuing him? A medic was responsible for the health of all soldiers. He could not sacrifice himself for just one of them. So if you have a soldier, maybe even a friend, right, who got shot in no man's land, that's the land that's exposed, not in the safety of the trench, and his legs had gotten blown off by a landmine, is he likely to make it?
No.
So should you risk your life, because you can hear him screaming, to go up and over and try to bring him back?
No. Yes.
That's the question that was facing medics. When do they put themselves at risk to go into no man's land? Because no man's land had no cover. All right, and the last one for this slide is shell shock. Shell shock was a disorder caused by extreme stress, known as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD.
There's 2 people on the slide I got.
Okay, you've got to let me finish and then I can answer you, okay? It puzzles doctors who attributed it to exposure to exploding shells. There was little sympathy for victims. Some were even treated as deserters. What do we know about the medical health industry in 1914? Yeah, it wasn't good. Did they understand how the brain worked?
No.
Did they understand a lot of psychological disorders? And treatment usually was electric shock therapy or abuse. And so the medical staff in war is completely ill-prepared to help these men, okay? One of the things your brain does when you face dramatic trauma is that it shuts down certain parts of your brain so that you can function and survive. Shell shock is almost like a temporary paralysis because your brain is shut down and you just need to reboot, but you can't move, you can't function. It almost looks like you've gone a little comatose, okay? It can look in a lot of different ways too. So the doctors couldn't even recognize it as being the same thing in multiple soldiers because the symptoms would be different in how they were responding. So far, life in the trenches, we got, right? Yeah. Okay. The war goes on for years, which means you're fighting in all seasons. Try to take a second, and you look at these scenes and imagine them in the different seasons of the year. 100 degrees in summer. Winter, 20 degrees. Huh? You're out in the sun. You're out in a big field with these trenches. They're not like in the woods or in the mountains, right? They're in the low areas where you get the most heat and right out in the middle. Okay? All right, take a look. Next slide. Walk around, move around, chit chat.
Big dude.
Sometimes if you stand up, you get a little bit different perspective, but it's up to you if you want
What's he grenades? Knapsack. Sand?
No, like the gun all over it. The white bag.
Those are grenades. It's a knapsack.
They should have things.
Just, they would light off all the grenades and run into the
I mean, unless they're trying to like just pull over and just take the bag and
just chuck.
just chuck the bag.
They probably wouldn't go because they were like.
Right. And honestly, if you live going off, just throw something off like a tree. If your legs are going off,
Miss Britt. Miss Britt. Miss Britt.
Kiddos, why don't we study this war extensively in U.S. history?
Because we weren't in it for that.
Because we didn't get into it. But in Europe, you'll spend a good month on this war in a year-long course. And the reason is this. Every single person that was in Great Britain's soldiers, or in their original army at the start of the war, they all died. There was no kind of making it. The Soviet Union, Russia, lost 90% of its military in World War I. So you're looking at the impact between those two trenches as dramatic. Like, you want it, it's almost like you can't process it. So it's like, yeah, he gets his leg blown off. But then you didn't realize that that literally happened over and over and over and over again. Why? Millions. This war kills more people than any other war in history. That's why I'm saying we don't pay a lot of attention to it in the United States because we only got into it at the very end. We have very few World War I casualties. Britain lost an entire generation of men. Russia, an entire generation of men gone. And they were drafting. You wouldn't have a choice. If you didn't join the military, you had to leave the country or you got shot or arrested. Like,
Did you say what about women?
people like us, middle-class people, didn't have a choice about joining up.
Who asked that?
Okay, they needed that many soldiers. Yes, question. Women do not come into combat really until World War II, and then it was in a limited role. They do show up in some smaller roles in World War I, but not many, and that was only because they were desperate for people, okay? So, it's almost like it's hard to wrap your head around how bad these trenches really were. All right.
These guys train.
No, that's the thing. The soldiers who are professional soldiers who were killed early on, they had lots of training. But when you get into a draft, people go through basic training and then they're shipped out. So the additional training that could save your life, right, there isn't time. So you're even at a further disadvantage, right? My son wants to join the military, and I'm like, perfect. You're doing ROTC in college, or you're going into an officer's program. Because I want my son to be as well trained as possible before he gets shipped overseas. You were in the military, weren't you?
No.
No. Someone I know said you were.
That's right.
Okay. Weapon inspection. Andre, let me go through this, and then I'll answer your question if that's possible, okay? As the First World War began, generals anticipated a short-fought war on open battlefields, kind of like Civil War. But the effectiveness of standard-issue rifles, pistols, and bayonets proved limited in trench warfare, and new, deadlier weapons were introduced as the war progressed. Machine guns killed thousands of soldiers who stood little chance against their rapid, relentless fire. Poison gas was used as a weapon, the only defense being a gas mask. The development of tanks, we looked at yesterday, and aircraft changed how future wars would be fought. We know the whole character of the war changes by the end, right? Because of the tanks and airplanes. Okay, let's start off with the guns. Check out the rifles. Rifles, usually Lee Enfield rifles, were issued to British soldiers on the Western Front. A rifle could be fired at targets up to 1,000 meters away. Bayonets, long blades, were often fixed to the rifles for close-up fighting. What are these? Grenades, very good. Grenades are small hand-thrown bombs. Soldiers pull out a pin before throwing them, following which there is a delay of a few seconds before they explode. A grenade landing in a trench could kill or wound many men, but you're limited to how far you can throw. Okay, protection. When the war began, soldiers wore cloth or leather hats offering limited protection. Steel helmets were introduced in 1915. This soldier wears a Brody helmet, often called a salad bowl, which was an adjustable screen to protect his eyes from shrapnel. Does anybody know what shrapnel is?
It's like when you throw a grenade and it like breaks up into little
Very good.
pieces.
Yeah, it's the pieces of the bomb itself that go flying through the air as projectiles. Okay, haversack. Every soldier had his own haversack. This contains personal items such as a mess tin, which is a lunchbox, knife and fork, food, shaving kit, spare clothes, and a waterproof brown sheet for sleeping or sitting. That's your bed, a canvas brown sheet. Again, there's a lot of things I just said about a person's life, right, that you could write about.
Wait, what was the back called?
A haversack, H-A-V-E-R-S-A-C-K. A mess kit. Yep, mess kit. So like all of your personal belongings fit in that one bag. You guys go to school with a giant backpack, right? You'd be in these trenches for over a year, just that bag. Haversack, yeah. H-A-V-E-R-S-A-C-K. Okay. All right, you ready to check out the next slide? Okay, go ahead, take a look around at these gentlemen.
What's that?
You know what I feel like this is like? This is like when you sit there waiting for a snow day. You're just waiting like you just need the first two to drop. And then
Reenactors. Well, they're reenactors. Edward.
Miss Britt.
They're not. They're in. So parts of the trenches were built up over time.
Miss Britt. Was slavery still a thing back in World War I?
Not in the British Empire, nor in the United States. But there is still human forced labor in other parts of the world. Yes. Okay. There was segregation in the U.S. military. All right, I'm going to need silence in 3, and 2, and good. Make sure you heard me. These are elite soldiers. They are known as the Cameronians, okay? They represent a legion of Scottish elite soldiers, kind of like the Green Berets or the Navy SEALs in the United States military. Okay, so something that Ed brought up too. The trenches get built up in certain areas. So the parts of the trenches that were moving as we lost land to the enemy and gained land to the enemy, right? That was all just dirt. But in these areas that are built further back, they actually line the walls with wood and things so that officers and hospitals can be built into the trenches. It's a great question. Yeah, fancy tin ceiling, yep, you're right. These soldiers are wearing the uniform of the Cameronians, the Scottish Rifles. A Scottish regiment with a history dating back to the 17th century. That's your 1600s. During the First World War, the Cameronians were represented by 27 different battalions. More than 7,000 Cameronians died during the war. The regiment was present at all major engagements on the Western Front, including the Battle of, Mr. Sheridan?
Ypres.
Ypres, and the Somme and the Mons. The Cameronians also served at Gallipoli in modern-day Turkey, in Egypt, in Palestine, and Macedonia. That word gets me every time. Battalions. The Cameronians' 27 battalions each consisted of around 1,000 men, led by lieutenant colonels. Battalions formed brigades of 3,500 men alongside other regiments, under brigadier generals. And brigades, in turn, combined to form a division of 12,000 men, led by a major general. Okay, take a peek because another picture just popped up. Strategy. The soldiers looked at plans for capturing Les Bessons, a village in France. In the early stages of the Battle of the Somme, the largest battle of the First World War on the Western Front, and one of the bloodiest battles in human history. Hundreds of thousands of people died in that one battle. The whole Civil War killed 500,000 Americans, right? The whole war. And that was over 4 years. This one battle kills 200,000 people. The battle? S-O-M-M-E. Edward? The battle's name? S-O-M-M-E. Somme. Okay, and the regiment. Even though the Cameronians, the Scottish Rifles, were a regiment, not all of the individual battalions served with each other. In fact, some animosity existed before the war and between different battalions. So the Scottish clans are a little regional, so you can imagine how that filters in a little bit. You've seen things like modern day depictions of Brave. Any questions? Okay, guys, you're doing good. All right. Please. Water, like barrel? Canteen? What does he say? The water canteen? Because you need water with you. You want to make sure you're getting your water from, like... No, and you have to be careful because, don't forget, people are using bathrooms here, people are bleeding, that all creates bacteria, that gets into your drinking water, you get dysentery and you can die. So you've got to make sure your water is coming from like your boiled or purified sources. Okay. All right, go ahead, take a look at this slide, move around and chit chat.
Hey, it sounds like Call of Duty. Wait, I like because you can shut your shotgun shells on fire.
Me or her?
The sound they made when they screamed.
So I noticed that like literally none of them are wearing like
Oh, yeah.
soldiers do now.
Yeah, so is there damage to their hearing?
Oh, definitely.
Extensive damage to their hearing, yeah.
But like, were the guns louder back then or?
They're just as loud, if not louder. Yeah. Remember when they were talking about the tanks yesterday, they said that the noise was deafening inside? All right, I'm going to need silence in 3, 2, and 1. Perfect. Okay. First World War soldiers would have dreaded the order to go over the top, leave the relative safety of their trenches, and cross no man's land and attack the enemy. First, an artillery barrage would prepare the way, bombarding enemy defenses. As the soldiers charged forward, they were sprayed with machine gun fire, and bodies fell all around. This was not an effective method of capturing ground, and the survivors would have to regroup and try again. often with little success. This is why the war starts to become a stalemate. The trenches get dug in, armies are going back and forth over the same territory for years without substantial gains. The death toll gets higher and higher, okay? Until we have tanks and planes locked down, this is the story. Okay. Now the next three points are kind of like little first-hand account from diaries.
Didn't they have like male and female tanks?
Yeah, they did from yesterday, yep. 2 guns female, 1 gun male. Okay, the order. Gunner C.J.T. Johnson. Slowly it seemed the minutes crept to 0, -5, then 4. Hook your lanyards. 3, 2, 1. Fire! Boom, scrunch, red, black, flash. The quivering of the ground and the deafening crumps and spurts of earth and smoke. So that's the order to go up and over. Going over. So you can see the gentlemen are climbing over now. Corporal Edward Glendinning. For the first 200 or 300 yards, there wasn't a great deal of firing. Hold on. But all of a sudden, they were opened up on us with terrific machine gun fire. We were getting fewer and fewer as we went down. Okay. And then we have them go. Do you see no man's land beyond these soldiers?
Yeah, sure.
See Arthur. In reaching the German front line, I'm hearing chit-chat. I can't read while we're talking, gentlemen. Thank you. In reaching the German front line, we found the troops in an act of relief and so crowded they couldn't use their rifles properly. So we had an easy time standing on their parapet and shooting down into their trench. The slaughter was pretty awful. So they were moving the soldiers in the German line from one trench to another. The trench is crowded as they're passing, and that's when the British came over the top. And they're looking down into the trench. The Germans can't move their rifles because they're so crowded. And what are the British doing to them? Yeah, you're shooting people at like 10 and 15 feet away. Is that something humans are supposed to do? So will there be an emotional price to pay for that action? Yeah, absolutely, right? Death and destruction. Corporal Edward Glendinning. The sight that met our eyes was quite unbelievable. If you can imagine a flock of sheep lying down in a sleeping field, the bodies were as thick as that. Some of them were still alive, and they were crying out.
I would just play dead.
And that wouldn't be a terrible strategy. The only problem is if you didn't fight and your fellow soldiers found out, I'm pretty sure there'd be consequences, especially if somebody else died, right? But I'm sure that thought went through a lot of things. Write that down, right? Because are you imagining what it would like to be there? Exactly. A lot of things. Write down. Just don't let me forget. Yes.
When you build a structure,
Sorry.
Yeah, but don't forget you're accountable. You're constantly, you have to check in with your superiors.